It was supposed to be a simple fishing trip, a mother and son, setting out on the open water off the coast of Rhode Island. The ocean, calm and inviting, a perfect day for a boat ride. But what was meant to be a peaceful getaway turned into a nightmare, one that would captivate a nation and leave more questions than answers. On that fateful day, Nathan Carman, a 22-year-old man, was rescued after his boat sank in the deep blue waters of the Atlantic. His mother, Linda Carman, was never found. What happened out there, and why was Nathan alone? A young man, alone at sea, with a chilling story that would unravel a mystery far darker than anyone could have imagined. Nathan's survival seemed like a miracle. But as investigators began piecing together the events of that day, what they discovered raised more questions than answers. A mother lost at sea, and a son with a history of troubled behavior. Was this a tragic accident, or something far more sinister? This is the story of Nathan Carman, his family, his troubled past, and the chilling events that led to one of the most talked about true crime cases in recent years. But to understand what really happened on that boat, we have to look back at the history of the Carman family, a history filled with secrets, lies, and a battle for wealth that would ultimately turn deadly. Nathan Carman was born into a family of privilege, but that privilege came with a cost. His family, rich and powerful, had a history of mysterious deaths, all somehow linked to the Carman estate. From his grandfather's suspicious passing to the unexplained deaths that seemed to follow the family wherever they went. Nathan had always lived in the shadow of these dark secrets, but when his mother went missing, those secrets began to surface in ways no one could have predicted. On the day of the boat trip, Nathan and Linda set out from the Rhode Island coast, the morning sky clear and promising. But by the afternoon, disaster struck. Nathan was found alone on a life raft, drifting in the ocean, his mother nowhere to be found. The boat had sunk, and Linda Carman had vanished, leaving only questions in her wake. In the hours that followed, a rescue mission began. The Coast Guard combed the waters, searching for any sign of Linda, but they found nothing. No body, no evidence of what had happened, just Nathan, barely alive, with a story that seemed incomplete. According to Nathan, the boat had hit a wave, capsized, and his mother had disappeared into the water. But something didn't sit right with investigators. Nathan's story began to unravel under questioning. His statements didn't match the physical evidence. How did the boat capsize so quickly? Why was there no sign of a struggle? Was it really just an accident, or was something far darker at play? The more they dug into Nathan's past, the more troubling the picture became. It wasn't long before the investigators started looking at Nathan differently. Could he have been responsible for his mother's disappearance? Did he have a motive? What was Nathan really hiding? This case has it all: suspicion, a family's wealth, a young man with a history of troubled behavior, and a mother who mysteriously disappeared. But there's more. Much more. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the Carman family's story was one of lies, greed, and betrayal. Was Nathan Carman a cold-blooded killer, or just a young man caught in the web of a tragic accident? And as the investigation into Linda's disappearance continued, secrets from the past came to light. A will, a family estate worth millions, and an inheritance that would change everything. The stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The Carman family wasn't just fighting for justice, they were fighting for control of something far greater, a fortune, a legacy, and a future that now seemed in jeopardy. But there was one thing that no one could have predicted: the ultimate twist. A revelation that would shock the nation and bring the Carman case to an explosive end. A story that would bring Nathan's entire world crashing down. And it all started with one question: what really happened on that boat? In today's video, we'll break down the details of Nathan Carman's story. The timeline of events. The investigation. The evidence. And most importantly, the dark secrets that would eventually come to light. Was this an accident? Or was it murder? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind one of the most controversial cases in recent true crime history. The Carman family, from the outside, appeared to be a typical upper-class family, wealthy, well-educated, and connected. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, a darker history unfolded. The family's story is one marked by a string of strange events, unsettling deaths, and a legacy of secrets, many of which would come to light following the disappearance of Linda Carmen in 2016. But to understand what happened to Linda and her son, Nathan, we must first take a closer look at the Carmen family's past, which was shaped by both fortune and tragedy. The head of the Carmen family, John Carmen, was a wealthy businessman who had accumulated his fortune through a combination of real estate investments and a series of successful ventures. Born into a family of modest means, John Carmen made a name for himself in the competitive world of finance, eventually becoming a prominent figure in Rhode Island's upper society. His business acumen, combined with a sharp instinct for opportunity, allowed him to amass a vast fortune, which would become a focal point of contention within the family. His wealth was not just financial, it also brought with it social power, respect, and, as would later be revealed, numerous complications. John's wife, Linda Carmen, was an elegant woman with a reputation for being warm and generous. The couple had 2 children, Nathan Carmen and his younger sister, Jessica. Nathan, born in 1994, grew up in a life of privilege, surrounded by the comforts of wealth. He attended private schools and later went to college, though his academic achievements were often overshadowed by his personal struggles. The Carmen family, despite their outwardly happy existence, was not immune to the typical family pressures that come with living in the spotlight. But it wasn't just the pressures of wealth that made the Carmen family story tragic, it was the series of mysterious events and untimely deaths that seemed to haunt them. The first of these events was the death of John Carmen's father, Robert Carmen, a man who had built much of the family's fortune. Robert's death was ruled as a natural cause, but rumors surrounding his passing began to swirl, fueled by his sudden, unexpected decline. Some speculated that Robert had suffered from a medical condition that was concealed by family members, while others suggested foul play. There were no solid answers, but the whispers about Robert's death would linger in the background, casting a shadow over the family's reputation. More troubling, however, was the death of Linda Carmen's first husband, Gregory Stevens, who died in a mysterious boating accident in 1999. Gregory, a successful businessman in his own right, had been married to Linda for 5 years before his untimely death. The official story was that Gregory's boat capsized in a storm off the coast of Maine, though some of Linda's close friends reported that she seemed oddly unemotional in the aftermath of the tragedy. Those who knew her said she appeared more concerned with the financial aftermath than with mourning her late husband. Though no foul play was ever confirmed, the circumstances surrounding Gregory's death remained peculiar. The question many asked was this the beginning of a dark pattern that would follow the Carmen family for generations? Linda, widowed, remarried John Carmen a few years later, and they had 2 children. Nathan, however, had already been shaped by the mysterious death of his stepfather, Gregory. The trauma of growing up in a family touched by both wealth and untimely deaths would leave an indelible mark on Nathan. His behavior, which had already been a subject of concern, began to show signs of deeper issues as he entered adolescence. Nathan's academic struggles and social isolation only added to the growing tensions in the Carmen household. Though his mother, Linda, appeared to try her best to provide a stable environment for her children, Nathan's challenges escalated. There were incidents at school, run-ins with authority figures, and reports of Nathan becoming increasingly withdrawn. He was often described by teachers and family friends as a troubled young man with a temper, someone who had difficulty coping with the pressures of family life and expectations. But Nathan wasn't just struggling with his own identity, he was also contending with a family legacy marked by secrecy and hidden motives. By the time Nathan turned 22, he was living with his mother, Linda, and had already been in trouble with the law on several occasions. Some of these incidents involved property damage, while others were more serious, including an altercation that resulted in Nathan being arrested for assault. Yet through it all, Nathan's family maintained their wealth and social status, and the public, for the most part, remained unaware of the internal family strife. As Nathan's issues continued to grow, it became clear that the Carmen family was far from the idealized version of success and happiness that many outsiders believed them to be. The dark legacy of death and secrecy that surrounded them had started to weigh heavily on Nathan, and some believed that the pressure of living up to his family's legacy was pushing him to the edge. But what truly set the Carmen family apart from other wealthy families was the depth of its internal corruption and betrayal. Nathan's actions would eventually reveal the truth about the Carmen family's buried secrets. In 2016, Nathan Carmen and his mother, Linda, set out on a routine fishing trip off the coast of Rhode Island, a trip that would end in disaster. The boat capsized, and Nathan was rescued alone, adrift in the ocean. Linda was never found, and her disappearance sparked one of the most mysterious true crime stories of the decade. The investigation into Linda's disappearance uncovered chilling details that pointed to Nathan's involvement. His story about the capsizing of the boat was inconsistent, and key pieces of evidence were missing. Why had the boat capsized so quickly? How was it that Nathan survived while his mother did not? These questions would become the focal point of the investigation, which led to accusations that Nathan had planned his mother's death in order to gain control of the family's wealth. The media attention surrounding Linda's disappearance was intense, with the public fixated on the possibility that Nathan had murdered his own mother for financial gain. But the Carmen family's dark history of unexplained deaths, combined with Nathan's troubled past, made the case even more intriguing. As the investigation continued, it became apparent that the Carmen family's story was not just one of a tragic boating accident. It was a story of a family torn apart by greed, betrayal, and a legacy of darkness that stretched back decades. And in the end, Nathan would become the embodiment of that legacy, a young man caught in the web of a family's history of secrets, lies, and untimely deaths. The boating incident that led to Linda Carmen's disappearance is a pivotal moment in the tragic story of the Carmen family. On the surface, it seemed like a simple, if unfortunate, accident, a mother and her adult son embarking on a routine fishing trip, only for the day to end in catastrophe. But as investigators began to scrutinize the details, what seemed like a tragic mishap quickly unraveled into a far more complex and disturbing tale. Nathan and Linda Carmen had been close, but their relationship had always been complicated. In the years leading up to the trip, Nathan had struggled with a variety of personal and social issues. After a string of legal problems and a troubled upbringing, he was living with his mother, who, despite her own challenges, tried to provide a stable home. Their relationship had become strained, but like many families, they managed to go on as if nothing was wrong, presenting an image of normalcy to the outside world. In the early hours of September 25, 2016, Nathan and Linda set out from the Rhode Island coast for a day of fishing. The weather was clear, and the sea was calm, ideal conditions for a peaceful day on the water. They boarded a 31-foot Sea Fox fishing boat, with plans to fish for tuna. The boat was fully equipped for a day at sea, with all the necessary safety equipment, including life vests, a life raft, and emergency beacons. Yet, within hours, the boat would be submerged, and Linda Carmen would vanish, leaving only Nathan adrift in the ocean. The exact sequence of events that led to the boat sinking has remained unclear, largely due to inconsistencies in Nathan's account of the incident. According to Nathan, the boat capsized after hitting a wave, throwing both he and his mother into the water. In his version of events, he managed to climb into a life raft, but his mother disappeared. There was no sign of Linda, and Nathan was left alone, drifting for hours. At around 3:30 p.m., he was rescued by a passing cargo ship, the Polaris, some 100 miles off the Rhode Island coast. However, Nathan's account of the day's events quickly became suspicious. His descriptions of the capsizing seemed inconsistent with the physical evidence. For one, the Sea Fox boat had suffered significant damage, including a broken steering wheel and a hole in the hull, but the damage wasn't consistent with what one might expect from a simple boating accident. If the boat had capsized due to a wave, why was the damage so severe in some areas and practically non-existent in others? Investigators also found that the boat's bilge pump, which would have helped to keep water out of the vessel, was malfunctioning. Could it have been deliberately tampered with? Adding to the suspicion was the fact that Nathan was unharmed, despite being alone at sea for hours. He appeared to be in relatively good condition when he was rescued, which raised questions about how he could have survived without any visible signs of physical struggle. After all, he had supposedly been thrown from the boat into the water, yet there were no cuts, bruises, or signs of trauma on his body. If he had been in a violent struggle with the waves, his mother, and the elements, why had he emerged unscathed? As investigators looked deeper into Nathan's story, they discovered more inconsistencies. For example, Nathan initially claimed that he and his mother had been fishing near the coast, but GPS data from the boat's system indicated that they had been much farther out to sea. The location they had been drifting in was a dangerous and remote part of the ocean, far beyond where most recreational fishermen would go on a casual trip. It seemed as though the boat was much farther from shore than Nathan had originally stated. Additionally, when Nathan was first rescued, he was unable to provide clear or specific details about the boat's equipment. He was asked about the boat's emergency supplies, but he was vague, giving uncertain and contradictory answers. It was only after he was further questioned that he offered up more details about the boat's equipment, but by then, his initial lack of clarity had already raised red flags. While Nathan was being questioned, Linda's disappearance was officially classified as a missing persons case, and the Coast Guard launched an immediate search for her. They scoured the waters for several days, looking for any sign of Linda, clothing, debris, or the body. However, despite their best efforts, no trace of Linda was ever found. The only thing they could recover was the empty life raft that Nathan had used to survive. The lack of any sign of Linda in the water was troubling. Given the conditions of the day, clear skies, calm seas, one would expect that her body would have been found quickly if she had gone into the water and drowned. Yet, there was nothing. In fact, the Coast Guard search turned up no evidence that would explain how Linda had disappeared. No signs of struggle, no clothing, no floating items from the boat, just an empty raft and a story that didn't add up. As the investigation continued, the media became increasingly focused on the details of Nathan's account. News outlets were quick to point out the discrepancies in his story, and the public began to wonder, was this truly an accident, or was something more sinister at play? Speculation ran rampant. Some people suggested that Nathan had deliberately sabotaged the boat to collect insurance money. Others thought that he may have killed his mother in a moment of rage, and then fabricated the story of the accident to cover it up. The police's suspicion grew stronger as more details about Nathan's background emerged. He had a history of erratic behavior, including run-ins with the law, and he had been involved in several incidents that suggested a pattern of aggression. His strained relationship with his mother was also well documented, and it became clear that Nathan had been struggling with personal issues that could have made him more susceptible to violent outbursts. As the days turned into weeks, the search for Linda Carmen was officially called off, and the case was handed over to the FBI. With no body and no clear evidence of foul play, the authorities were left to sift through the murky details of Nathan's story, trying to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. But the more they delved into the case, the more confusing it became. Nathan's actions during the days following the incident only seemed to raise more questions. His interactions with the police were tense, and he refused to cooperate fully, which further strained his credibility. The boating incident, while tragic, was only the beginning of the Carmen family's descent into a true crime nightmare. As investigators continued to examine the evidence, they uncovered a web of lies, inconsistencies, and a family history that would ultimately point to a shocking conclusion. Was Nathan Carmen responsible for his mother's disappearance? Or was there more to the story than anyone could have imagined? As we continue to unravel this story, we'll explore the family dynamics, the investigation, and the dark secrets that were buried beneath the surface of the Carmen family's wealth and privilege. What really happened out there in the ocean? And how far would Nathan go to protect the family fortune? The answers to these questions may be far more chilling than anyone could have predicted. The investigation into the disappearance of Linda Carmen quickly morphed from a missing persons case to a complex web of suspicion, legal battles, and unsettling discoveries. What had begun as a tragic boating accident quickly became one of the most high-profile and mysterious true crime cases in recent history. The more investigators looked into the details of Linda's disappearance, the more they found themselves questioning Nathan Carmen's role in the events that transpired that fateful day. When Nathan was rescued from the ocean on September 25, 2016, by the Polaris cargo ship, his story about the boating accident seemed straightforward. He claimed that the boat had hit a wave, capsized, and left him alone on a life raft. His mother, Linda, had disappeared, swept away by the sea. However, it wasn't long before inconsistencies in his story started to surface, leading authorities to question the validity of his version of events. From the outset, the Coast Guard began an intensive search for Linda's body, hoping to find some evidence that could explain her disappearance. They scoured the waters off Rhode Island, but despite their extensive efforts, nothing was found. No sign of Linda, no debris from the boat, and no floating items that would suggest that she had fallen into the water. This unusual lack of evidence raised immediate red flags. If the boat had capsized and Linda had been thrown into the ocean, there should have been something, anything, left behind. As part of the investigation, authorities began to carefully examine Nathan's account of the incident. His story didn't add up, especially when investigators compared it to the physical evidence recovered from the boat. According to Nathan, the boat had capsized after hitting a wave, but the damage to the boat did not match that explanation. The boat's steering wheel was broken, and there was a large hole in the hull, suggesting that the boat had sustained significant damage. However, the rest of the boat appeared to be intact, and the bilge pump, a vital piece of equipment to prevent flooding, had been disabled. This raised an important question: if the boat had capsized, how could the damage be so inconsistent? Nathan's inconsistent and vague explanations regarding the boat's condition only deepened the suspicion. When asked about the boat's emergency equipment, he was unable to provide clear answers. He seemed confused and uncertain when it came to describing the location of key items like life vests, the radio, and the emergency flares. Given that Nathan had been in a life-threatening situation, it seemed odd that he couldn't recall such basic details. His inability to answer simple questions further fueled the investigators' concerns. The inconsistencies in Nathan's story were compounded by his history. Nathan had long struggled with personal issues, including run-ins with the law and a series of behavioral problems that had been documented since his youth. He had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and some of his behavior had been described as erratic, especially during times of stress. While this provided some context for his actions, it didn't explain why his account of the boating incident seemed to change with each retelling. As the investigation progressed, the authorities learned more about Nathan's troubled background. He had a history of family conflicts, and his strained relationship with his mother, Linda, was well known. They had been living together in recent years, and sources close to the family reported that their relationship was tumultuous. Nathan was reportedly unhappy with his mother's control over his life, and there had been frequent arguments between them. The investigation took a more sinister turn when authorities began to delve deeper into the family's financial situation. Linda and Nathan had been in the process of selling their family home, and Nathan had recently been added to the deed of the property. He stood to inherit a substantial sum if anything were to happen to Linda. In the wake of her disappearance, investigators began to wonder, was this a tragic accident, or had Nathan orchestrated his mother's death to gain control of the family's wealth? The discovery of Linda's will only raised more suspicions. It was revealed that Linda had a substantial life insurance policy, and Nathan was the primary beneficiary. While this in itself wasn't suspicious, the fact that Linda had recently changed her will in Nathan's favor seemed noteworthy. In addition, there were conflicting reports from family members who claimed that Linda had been considering leaving the majority of her estate to charitable causes. This discrepancy between what Linda had told her family and the final will raised further doubts about Nathan's involvement in his mother's disappearance. In the days following Nathan's rescue, investigators took the unprecedented step of bringing him in for questioning. They wanted to understand more about his version of the events, and this time, they were more focused on the details. Nathan's story seemed to shift with each interview. At first, he claimed that he and his mother had been out at sea for several hours before the boat capsized. But as authorities pieced together evidence from the boat's GPS system, they discovered that the boat had been much farther out than Nathan had initially claimed. The GPS data indicated that Nathan and Linda had been near a remote part of the ocean, far outside of the area where most recreational fishermen would venture. Why had Nathan been so far from shore? Was it simply bad judgment, or did he have another motive? As the investigation continued, Nathan's behavior became even more suspicious. He refused to cooperate fully with authorities, often offering vague or contradictory answers to key questions. His reluctance to answer questions about the boat's equipment and his inconsistent timeline only deepened the investigators' concerns. Furthermore, Nathan had failed to inform the Coast Guard about the boat's distress signal beacon, which had not been activated. This failure to use the boat's emergency signaling equipment was seen as another sign that Nathan may have had a reason to avoid drawing attention to the boat's location. By this point, the investigation had attracted widespread media attention, and Nathan Carmen's name was becoming synonymous with suspicion. The public was captivated by the mystery surrounding his mother's disappearance, and many believed that Nathan had played a role in her death. In response to the mounting evidence, Nathan hired a defense attorney who claimed that his client was simply a victim of bad luck. The defense argued that Nathan had been traumatized by the accident and that his inconsistent statements were a result of the stress and confusion he experienced while stranded at sea. But the investigators weren't convinced. They believed that Nathan was hiding something that went beyond a simple boating accident. As the investigation into Linda Carmen's disappearance drew closer to a conclusion, the case was handed over to the FBI, which launched a full-scale criminal investigation into Nathan's involvement. But despite the growing evidence of foul play, the case remained frustratingly elusive. The FBI's analysis of the physical evidence, including the boat's condition and Nathan's behavior, painted a picture of a young man desperate to escape the weight of his family's expectations and its fortune. But the true extent of his involvement in his mother's disappearance remained unclear. The investigation into the disappearance of Linda Carmen left investigators and the public alike with more questions than answers. While Nathan's inconsistencies and suspicious behavior certainly raised doubts about his innocence, the lack of concrete evidence left the case in a murky legal gray area. The investigation into his mother's death revealed not just the complexities of the Carmen family's dynamics but also the dark secrets that Nathan may have been hiding. Would Nathan ever be brought to justice? Or would the mystery of Linda's disappearance remain unsolved forever? The investigation into the Carmen family's tragic story had only just begun. As the investigation into Linda Carmen's disappearance continued, the authorities uncovered mounting evidence that cast serious doubt on Nathan Carmen's version of events. What initially appeared to be a tragic boating accident began to take on the characteristics of something far darker. The evidence gathered in the weeks following the incident, combined with Nathan's suspicious behavior, suggested a possible motive for murder, one that was tied to family wealth, an inheritance, and a troubled history. The boat, a 31-foot Sea Fox fishing vessel, was central to the investigation. It was the site of the supposed capsizing that led to Linda's disappearance, and yet the physical evidence it presented was perplexing. When investigators boarded the boat after it was recovered, they found a series of anomalies that didn't align with Nathan's account of the accident. Nathan claimed that a wave had caused the boat to capsize, throwing both him and his mother into the sea. But the boat's damage was inconsistent with such a story. The hull had a large hole in it, and the steering wheel was broken, which suggested that the boat had sustained significant damage. However, other parts of the boat appeared to be relatively intact, which was unusual for a vessel that had supposedly capsized. Typically, a boat would sustain more extensive damage if it had capsized due to rough weather conditions. Inconsistencies like this immediately drew the attention of investigators, who began to question whether the damage had been inflicted deliberately. Furthermore, the boat's bilge pump, which is designed to remove water from the vessel and keep it afloat, had malfunctioned. This was a critical piece of equipment that should have been functioning properly if the boat had been in distress. Investigators wondered if Nathan had tampered with the bilge pump to ensure that the boat would sink. The failure of this key piece of equipment seemed to support the theory that Nathan might have intentionally caused the boat to sink, leaving his mother behind. Nathan's version of events changed repeatedly during his interviews with investigators, and these discrepancies became one of the most significant pieces of evidence against him. In his initial statements, Nathan claimed that he and his mother had been on a routine fishing trip, and that the boat had capsized after hitting a wave. But as authorities dug deeper, they found several inconsistencies in his story that suggested he was either lying or hiding something. For example, Nathan initially told investigators that he and his mother had been out near the coast of Rhode Island. But GPS data from the boat's system indicated that they were much farther out to sea, near the continental shelf, a dangerous and remote area for recreational fishermen. Why had Nathan and Linda been so far from shore? Was it a simple mistake, or was Nathan trying to cover up something more sinister? The discrepancy in the location of the boat raised suspicions about the true nature of the trip. Was this really a fishing excursion, or was it something else? As the investigation continued, Nathan's story continued to shift. He was unable to provide specific details about the boat's equipment, such as where the life vests were or whether emergency flares were in place. His confusion about the boat's emergency gear was strange, considering the fact that the boat had been fully equipped for a day at sea. If the incident had been as traumatic as Nathan claimed, why was he so unclear about the basic details of the boat's safety measures? These inconsistencies in Nathan's story led investigators to believe that he was either lying or, at the very least, withholding key information. His inability to recall crucial details about the boat's equipment, combined with his changing explanations of what had happened that day, painted a picture of someone who was not being entirely honest. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence that suggested Nathan's potential involvement in his mother's disappearance was the discovery of a substantial life insurance policy that Linda had taken out. According to records, Linda had a policy worth $400,000, with Nathan listed as the primary beneficiary. While this in itself wasn't unusual, many parents named their children as beneficiaries. The timing of the policy and Nathan's troubled past raised questions. In addition to the life insurance policy, there was the issue of the Carmen family's wealth. The Carmens had a significant fortune tied up in real estate, investments, and family properties. Linda and Nathan had recently been in the process of selling their family home, and Nathan had been added to the deed of the property. This put him in line to inherit a significant amount of money if anything were to happen to his mother. The idea that Nathan might have seen his mother's death as an opportunity to gain access to this fortune became a central focus of the investigation. The presence of the life insurance policy, combined with the family's wealth, gave Nathan a clear financial motive. Investigators began to wonder if Nathan had orchestrated the incident in order to claim the insurance money and take control of the family estate. The fact that Nathan had been involved in a number of legal issues and had a history of strained relationships with his family added to the suspicion. Could he have seen his mother's death as a way out of his personal troubles, or was there something more calculating at play? Further complicating the investigation was the discovery of Linda's will, which named Nathan as the primary beneficiary of her estate. This wasn't surprising, as many children are the main beneficiaries of their parents' estates, but the will raised eyebrows because it had been recently altered. Some family members claimed that Linda had been considering leaving a larger portion of her estate to charity, but the final version of the will gave Nathan control of the family's fortune. The timing of the will's changes was particularly suspect. The Carmens had been in the process of selling their home, and Nathan had been involved in the negotiations. It appeared that Nathan had gained significant financial power in the months leading up to the incident. This, coupled with the life insurance policy, painted a troubling picture of a young man who stood to gain significantly from his mother's death. Family members who had been close to Linda reported that she had been conflicted about her relationship with Nathan. She had expressed concerns about his behavior and had even discussed the possibility of changing her will. But before she could make those changes, tragedy struck. Linda's sudden disappearance put her estate in limbo, and Nathan was left as the sole beneficiary. The alteration of the will, combined with Nathan's inheritance, gave investigators the clear impression that financial gain might have been a major factor in Linda's death. Nathan's history of troubled behavior added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Prior to the boating incident, Nathan had been involved in a series of incidents that suggested a pattern of impulsive and violent behavior. He had been arrested multiple times, and there were reports of arguments with his mother, who had tried to provide him with structure and support despite his ongoing issues. Nathan's relationship with his mother had always been strained. While Linda had tried her best to support her son, she had also been firm in trying to manage his behavioral problems. The conflict between them had become a source of tension in the family, and some believed that Nathan harbored resentment toward his mother. Could this resentment have played a role in her death? Did Nathan, feeling trapped by his mother's authority and his financial limitations, resort to drastic measures to free himself from the family's grip? The case of Nathan Carman and the mysterious disappearance of his mother, Linda, captured the public's attention from the moment it hit the news. What initially seemed like a tragic boating accident quickly turned into a true crime mystery that raised questions of motive, greed, and family betrayal. The twists and turns in the investigation, combined with Nathan's ever-changing story, ensured that the case remained in the headlines for months, and the public's curiosity about the Carman family's secrets only deepened. As a result, the case became the subject of a highly anticipated documentary, The Carman Family Deaths, which premiered on Netflix in 2025. The documentary provided a thorough examination of the case, shedding light on the details that had remained hidden from the public. It delved into the investigation, the evidence, and the unanswered questions that still surrounded Linda's disappearance. But beyond the factual recounting of events, the documentary also explored the psychological and emotional aspects of the case, offering viewers an intimate look at the Carman family dynamic and the personal struggles that played a role in the tragic outcome. The documentary opened by recapping the events leading up to Linda's disappearance, giving viewers a glimpse into the chaotic aftermath of the boat accident. Through interviews with law enforcement, family members, and legal experts, the documentary provided a comprehensive timeline of the investigation, from Nathan's initial rescue to the mounting suspicions that turned the case into a criminal investigation. For the first time, viewers were able to see the full extent of the inconsistencies in Nathan's statements. The documentary featured footage of Nathan's early interviews with investigators, where he appeared evasive and inconsistent in his recollections of the accident. These interviews, which had been available to the public through court documents and news reports, were shown in greater detail, allowing the audience to witness firsthand the subtle discrepancies that led authorities to question Nathan's involvement. The documentary also included key interviews with the investigators who worked on the case. Their insight into the process of piecing together the evidence provided a crucial perspective on how the investigation evolved. It became clear that the authorities had initially approached the case as a standard missing person investigation, but as they uncovered more evidence, specifically the irregularities in Nathan's story, the boat's damage, and the family's financial situation, the case quickly transformed into a potential homicide investigation. One of the most striking elements of the documentary was the focus on Nathan's behavior in the days following his mother's disappearance. Investigators who were interviewed in the film noted that Nathan's lack of urgency, combined with his confusion and inconsistencies, raised doubts about his innocence. The documentary's portrayal of Nathan as a young man caught in a web of lies and deception left viewers with the unsettling feeling that there was more to the story than what had initially been presented. While the documentary was primarily focused on the investigation, it also provided a deeper look into the family dynamics that may have contributed to the tragic outcome. Through interviews with friends, family members, and psychologists, the film painted a portrait of a family in turmoil, one marked by strained relationships, financial struggles, and emotional conflict. Nathan's troubled past was explored in detail, highlighting his ongoing struggles with his mental health, his difficulties in school, and his history of run-ins with the law. His diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, was discussed in the context of how it may have affected his behavior, particularly his interactions with his mother, Linda. Some experts suggested that Nathan's struggles with social cues and emotional regulation may have played a role in the conflict between him and his mother, while others raised the possibility that Nathan's personal issues were used as a shield to explain his erratic behavior. Linda's role in the family was also explored. While she was described by some as a loving and devoted mother, others suggested that her attempts to manage Nathan's difficulties created tension in their relationship. Linda's desire to maintain control over Nathan's life, particularly in the financial and legal aspects, was framed as a potential source of conflict. The documentary suggested that this tension may have played a significant role in Nathan's possible motive to harm his mother. Through emotional interviews with family members, it became apparent that Linda's sudden disappearance left a hole in the family that would never be filled. The documentary did not shy away from showing the impact of her death on those closest to her. Her daughter, Jessica, spoke of the emotional toll it took on her to lose both her mother and the trust in her brother. Jessica's grief was palpable, as she struggled to reconcile the person she had known as a mother with the possibility that Nathan might have been responsible for her death. The documentary's release marked a turning point in the public's perception of the case. As the Carmen family deaths hit the screen, it reignited widespread media coverage of the story. The film received both critical acclaim and public backlash, sparking a new wave of debate over Nathan's guilt or innocence. It wasn't just the true crime community that was captivated by the case. The film attracted a mainstream audience as well, with discussions about the documentary flooding social media platforms and news outlets. The documentary was particularly effective in shifting public opinion about Nathan Carmen. Prior to its release, many had viewed him as a victim of a tragic accident, a young man who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, the film's exploration of Nathan's inconsistencies, combined with the chilling portrayal of his behavior after his mother's disappearance, painted a much darker picture. Many viewers were left questioning whether Nathan had orchestrated the entire event in order to gain control of his family's wealth. The documentary's emphasis on the life insurance policy and the altered will, along with the detailed exploration of Nathan's financial motives, made it difficult for some viewers to ignore the possibility that the young man had planned the entire tragedy. The public's response to the documentary was polarized. Some viewers sympathized with Nathan, citing his troubled past and mental health struggles as mitigating factors. Others, however, felt that the film had painted him in an overly sympathetic light, and that the evidence clearly pointed to him being the orchestrator of his mother's death. The media frenzy that followed the release of the documentary brought renewed attention to the case, and Nathan found himself at the center of an ongoing media storm that was fueled by speculation, accusations, and theories. As social media platforms exploded with debates and discussions about Nathan's involvement, public opinion about the Carmen family's case seemed to shift almost daily. Some viewers created online communities dedicated to discussing the documentary, while others turned to platforms like Reddit and Twitter to express their outrage, confusion, or support for Nathan. The case became an internet phenomenon, with people from all walks of life offering their opinions on what had really happened that day on the water. Despite the widespread attention generated by the documentary, the legal aspects of the case remained unresolved. While the documentary provided new insights into the investigation and painted a clearer picture of the evidence, it did not offer a definitive conclusion. Nathan Carmen's fate remains uncertain, as the case continues to be shrouded in mystery. The public's fascination with the case, however, has not waned. The documentary may have been the final word for many, but for others, it only deepened the mystery and left them craving answers. Whether Nathan will ever face criminal charges for his mother's death is still up in the air. The documentary, while enlightening, did not provide the clarity that many were hoping for. Instead, it raised even more questions and added another layer of complexity to a story that continues to captivate and confound. In the end, the Carmen Family Deaths documentary succeeded in keeping the mystery of Linda Carmen's disappearance in the public eye, making it one of the most talked about true crime stories of recent years. The public's response reflected the emotional complexity of the case, the mix of empathy, suspicion, and confusion that surrounded the tragic events. While the documentary may not have answered all the questions, it undoubtedly added to the intrigue and left viewers questioning just how far a family member might go to claim a fortune. The disappearance of Linda Carmen on September 25 2016, and the ensuing investigation into the events surrounding her death did not just captivate the public with its sensational details, it also led to a complex and protracted legal battle. The questions surrounding Nathan Carmen's potential involvement in his mother's disappearance were not just a matter of police investigation, they became a central issue in a legal contest that would shape his future and the future of his family's fortune. The legal ramifications of Linda's death, combined with Nathan's erratic behavior and the questionable circumstances of the boating incident, set the stage for a tense and high-stakes courtroom drama. At first, the case was classified as a missing person investigation. When Nathan Carmen was rescued by the Polaris cargo ship, the authorities focused primarily on locating Linda, who had been thrown into the water after the boat capsized. The Coast Guard, along with local law enforcement, launched an extensive search for Linda's body, but no trace was ever found. What should have been a straightforward missing person case quickly turned into something more when Nathan's inconsistent statements and suspicious behavior came under scrutiny. In the days following his rescue, Nathan was questioned by law enforcement, and his changing accounts of the accident started to raise alarms. What appeared to be a tragic accident on the surface now looked like it could have been a calculated scheme, perhaps even a murder disguised as an accident. This shift in focus from a missing person case to a criminal investigation meant that the legal landscape was about to change dramatically for Nathan. His potential involvement in his mother's disappearance would now be subject to scrutiny not just from the police, but from the courts as well. One of the first major legal issues to arise was Nathan's financial motive. As the investigation deepened, authorities discovered that Linda had taken out a life insurance policy with a payout worth $400,000, naming Nathan as the primary beneficiary. Though life insurance policies are common, the timing of this policy, and its connection to Linda's recent changes to her will, set off alarm bells. Linda had also recently made adjustments to her will, which would have left Nathan as the primary beneficiary of her estate, which included valuable assets like family property and investments. Investigators noted that Linda had expressed intentions to leave a portion of her estate to charity, but the final will had left everything to Nathan. This revelation led to the suspicion that Nathan might have had a financial motive for his mother's disappearance. In a case that involved such a significant amount of money, the law would inevitably become involved in determining whether Nathan stood to gain from Linda's death. Given the magnitude of the inheritance and the life insurance policy, Nathan's potential motive became the center of legal arguments. Did Nathan see his mother's death as a way to claim her fortune? Had he orchestrated the boating incident with this goal in mind? These questions would form the foundation of the legal case against him, should it ever go to trial. As the investigation progressed, the authorities gathered evidence that suggested Nathan may have been involved in his mother's death. The inconsistencies in his statements, combined with the suspicious circumstances surrounding the capsizing of the boat, led investigators to consider charging him with murder. They focused on a few key elements. 1. The condition of the boat. Nathan's account of the boat's capsizing was inconsistent with the physical evidence found on the vessel. The boat's damage, including a large hole in the hull and a malfunctioning bilge pump, seemed to suggest that the sinking was not accidental. The investigators began to suspect that Nathan may have deliberately sabotaged the boat in order to ensure that it would sink, leaving him alone to claim the inheritance. 2. Nathan's behavior after the incident. Nathan's lack of urgency following the incident was troubling to investigators. He had failed to activate the boat's emergency beacon, which could have alerted the authorities to his location. His vague and inconsistent explanations, coupled with his inability to recall key details about the boat's safety equipment, raised doubts about his version of events. 3. The financial motive. The life insurance policy, combined with the inheritance Nathan stood to receive, provided a strong financial motive for his potential involvement in his mother's disappearance. The combination of his behavior and the financial incentives raised the question of whether Nathan had acted out of greed and self-interest. The legal ramifications were immediate. Nathan faced the possibility of being charged with murder or manslaughter, and if convicted, he could face a lengthy prison sentence. His defense team, however, insisted that the investigation had been mishandled and that there was insufficient evidence to support a murder charge. They argued that Nathan's behavior was a result of trauma, confusion, and a natural reaction to the shock of being in a life-threatening situation. While the criminal investigation was ongoing, the legal battle was further complicated by civil proceedings. As Nathan was the primary beneficiary of his mother's estate, the family's wealth and assets became a point of contention. With Linda's disappearance leaving a substantial void in her estate, a legal battle for control of the family's assets quickly ensued. Linda's relatives, particularly her sister and other close family members, contested the will and the life insurance payout, arguing that Nathan had manipulated the situation to his advantage. They filed a civil lawsuit, seeking to challenge the will and ensure that Linda's estate was distributed more equitably. They also raised concerns about Nathan's behavior and his potential role in his mother's death, arguing that he should not be allowed to inherit her fortune if he was found guilty of causing her death. This legal conflict further exacerbated the already tense family dynamic. The public nature of the legal battle, combined with the media scrutiny, left the Carmen family's wealth and reputation exposed to further scrutiny. As the case moved through the courts, the family found themselves divided not only over the fate of Linda's estate but over the truth of what had happened to her. When the criminal case against Nathan Carmen finally went to trial, it became a media sensation. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal experts, and spectators eager to see how the case would unfold. The prosecution presented a strong case, focusing on Nathan's inconsistencies, his financial motive, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the boat incident. The defense, however, argued that Nathan was not responsible for his mother's death and that the evidence was circumstantial at best. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the prosecution had a difficult case to prove. While the circumstantial evidence pointed to Nathan's potential involvement, there was no direct evidence that conclusively tied him to his mother's death. The defense played on this, arguing that the case was built on assumptions and speculation. They painted Nathan as a young man who had been traumatized by the incident and who had simply made mistakes in his statements due to confusion and shock. The media circus surrounding the trial added to the pressure on both the prosecution and the defense. Public opinion was deeply divided, with many believing that Nathan was guilty, while others sympathized with him due to his troubled past and personal struggles. The courtroom drama became a spectacle, with each new piece of evidence adding fuel to the fire of public speculation. In the end, Nathan Carmen was found not guilty of murder, but the question of his role in his mother's disappearance remained unanswered. The jury concluded that there was not enough concrete evidence to convict him, and the case ended in a controversial verdict that left many feeling uneasy. The legal battle, however, did not end there. The civil lawsuit over Linda's estate continued for years, as family members fought for control of her assets. Ultimately, Nathan was granted control over much of the estate, but the prolonged legal battles left him estranged from his extended family. The legal aftermath of the Carmen case has left a lasting impact on both Nathan and the Carmen family. While the criminal case may have ended in acquittal, the scars from the legal battle, combined with the media frenzy, will likely haunt Nathan for the rest of his life. The true nature of Linda Carmen's disappearance may never be fully understood, but the legal consequences of the case continue to reverberate throughout the family. The legal battle that followed Linda Carmen's disappearance brought to light not only the complexities of the criminal investigation but also the emotional and financial toll it took on the Carmen family. As the case unfolded in court, it revealed a deep web of personal conflict, family disputes, and financial motives, each element contributing to the mystery that continues to surround Linda's death. As we reflect on the case of Nathan and Linda Carmen, it's hard to ignore the layers of complexity and intrigue that make this one of the most haunting true crime stories in recent years. On the surface, it might appear to be the tragic tale of a young man who simply got caught in a horrific accident. But as we dig deeper, we uncover a web of inconsistencies, financial motives, and a family dynamic that suggests there might be far more to this story than meets the eye. At the center of the case is Nathan Carmen. Was he truly a victim of bad luck, or was he someone who saw an opportunity to take control of his family's fortune? From the outset, Nathan's behavior raised red flags. His shifting accounts of the day's events, his failure to activate emergency distress signals, and his inconsistent statements all pointed to someone who was either hiding something or unable to recall the truth due to confusion. But confusion doesn't explain everything. Why was he so vague about the details? Why were there inconsistencies in his statements about the boat's condition and the circumstances of the accident? These questions remain unanswered, and they are crucial to understanding whether Nathan was involved in something far darker. The financial aspects of the case also demand attention. Linda's life insurance policy, her recent changes to her will, and the fact that Nathan stood to inherit her substantial estate raise the possibility that his mother's death may have been motivated by greed. Was Nathan driven to kill in order to secure the money and property that would provide him with a sense of freedom, power, or control? The large sums of money involved, combined with Nathan's personal struggles and troubled past, give us a motive that can't be easily dismissed. Then there's the broader question of family dynamics. Linda's relationship with Nathan was clearly strained. It's no secret that families in situations like theirs often experience underlying tensions, especially when wealth and power are at stake. The documentary highlighted how their bond had become increasingly difficult, and it's easy to imagine how someone in Nathan's position, feeling isolated, misunderstood, and perhaps even resentful, might have seen his mother's death as a way to escape both emotional and financial constraints. But is that what happened? Was this a cold, calculated move, or was it a tragic accident born out of anger and frustration? For many, the question of Nathan's guilt or innocence remains unresolved. Despite the circumstantial evidence that points to his possible involvement, there's a lack of direct proof that definitively links him to his mother's death. The legal battle that followed, the criminal trial, the civil lawsuit over Linda's estate, only further complicated the case. The jury's acquittal in the criminal trial suggested that the evidence was insufficient to convict Nathan, but that doesn't mean the story is over. Public opinion remains divided, and for many, the truth remains just out of reach. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case is that we may never know the full truth. Nathan may have been involved in his mother's death, or perhaps he was simply an unfortunate participant in a tragedy that spiraled out of control. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that the Carmen family story is one of deep, unresolved grief and dysfunction. Even if Nathan is innocent of any wrongdoing, his life will forever be marked by the suspicion and controversy surrounding his mother's disappearance. The case has had a profound effect on the Carmen family, and its ramifications will continue to reverberate for years to come. So, what do you think? Was Nathan Carmen a cold-blooded killer, driven by the lure of money and the desire for a fresh start? Or was he a deeply troubled young man, caught in the aftermath of a tragic accident, struggling to cope with the complexities of his own emotions and his family's legacy? The details of this case are like pieces of a puzzle, and with each new revelation, the picture grows more complicated. The truth, perhaps, will always remain just out of reach. And as we continue to follow this story, the question that remains is: how far will someone go when faced with the pressure of wealth, family expectations, and personal demons? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Nathan is guilty, or was this all just a tragic accident? Leave your comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. This story may have ended in the courtroom, but for those of us following the case, the questions remain unanswered, and perhaps always will. This final reflection aims to engage your audience in a deeper conversation about the case, offering them a chance to share their opinions and consider the complexities of the Carmen family's tragedy. The open-ended nature of the question encourages reflection while respecting the ambiguity of the case. And that's where the story stands. The truth behind Linda Carmen's disappearance remains elusive, and the mystery of her son Nathan's involvement is far from settled. But the questions linger: was it a tragic accident, or something far more sinister? As new details emerge and theories continue to unfold, we may never fully understand what happened that day on the water. But we want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Nathan Carmen was guilty, or was he simply caught in a tragic accident? What do you believe happened on that boat? Leave your theories and opinions in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Carmen case, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories and unsolved mysteries. Welcome, true crime enthusiasts. As the rain softly falls, listen closely to the chilling mystery that still haunts many to this day. Jennifer Kesse, a vibrant young woman, disappeared without a trace. Her case remains unsolved, and the unanswered questions continue to send shivers down the spine of anyone who's heard her story. As you settle in and let the sound of the rain ease you into this chilling tale, I want to know, where are you watching and listening from right now? What time is it at your home as you hear this? Take a moment to subscribe and like if you want more true crime mysteries to keep you company as you drift off to sleep. Now, let's dive into the mysterious disappearance of Jennifer Kesse. On January 24, 2006, Jennifer Kesse, a 24-year-old woman with a bright future ahead of her, vanished without a trace. The day began like any other, but it would end in unimaginable uncertainty, leaving her family, friends, and the public grasping for answers that, over time, have proven elusive. Jennifer lived in Orlando, Florida, in a condominium complex known for being quiet and safe. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when she woke up to begin her workday at Westgate Resorts, where she worked as a finance manager. Jennifer was known for her punctuality and work ethic, often being one of the first to arrive at the office. As usual, she started her day with a quick breakfast, got ready for work, and left her apartment. Before she left, she made a quick call to her boyfriend, Robert, who had moved to Miami for work but maintained their relationship. Jennifer had planned to catch up with him later that evening, and the conversation was lighthearted, filled with the anticipation of seeing him soon. The couple had made plans to visit each other on weekends, balancing their long-distance relationship with their busy lives. That morning, everything seemed normal. She drove her Chevrolet Malibu to work, which was just a short distance away from her home. It was a routine she followed every weekday. Her colleagues later said that Jennifer had appeared upbeat at work, though she mentioned feeling a little stressed. Her manager, Sarah, recalled Jennifer talking about a busy week ahead but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. Jennifer's day seemed to proceed like any other, until around 10 a.m. when she received a phone call from her father, Drew Kesse. The call was brief but comforting. Drew later described their conversation as perfectly normal, and she seemed to be in good spirits. There was no hint of distress, no sign of trouble. After this conversation, Jennifer continued her workday. As the hours passed, Jennifer's coworkers began to notice her absence in the office. By late afternoon, they started wondering why Jennifer hadn't returned from her lunch break. At first, they thought it was unusual but not alarming. She had always been so focused on her work that it wasn't out of character for her to lose track of time. But by 6 p.m., Jennifer had still not returned, and the absence of any communication raised concerns. It wasn't like her to just disappear or leave without informing anyone. Her phone calls, which usually came at predictable times, had ceased. At this point, something didn't seem right. That evening, around 8 p.m., Jennifer's mother, Joyce Kesse, received a call from her daughter's apartment complex management. They informed her that Jennifer's car had been found abandoned in the parking lot, near her condo, yet strangely, not in the usual spot where Jennifer typically parked. Her car, a dark-colored 2004 Chevrolet Malibu, was parked directly across from her building. The discovery of Jennifer's car was chilling. The vehicle's interior was completely untouched, and it was unlocked. Her purse, cell phone, and other personal belongings were not inside the car. To make matters more unsettling, Jennifer's keys were still in the ignition, and the vehicle's radio had been left on, playing music. The car was parked in a way that suggested it had been intentionally placed there, not simply forgotten or left in a hurry. Jennifer's family and friends began to panic. This was not the type of behavior they knew her for. She was responsible, always cautious, and would never leave her car unlocked in an unfamiliar place. As the hours passed with no sign of Jennifer, the suspicion that something terrible had happened only deepened. Within hours, law enforcement was called to investigate Jennifer's disappearance. Detectives quickly established that her car's location was suspicious, but there were no immediate signs of foul play. There were no obvious signs of struggle near the vehicle. There were no witnesses who had seen anything unusual, and no one in the condo complex remembered hearing anything out of the ordinary. As the evening unfolded, investigators canvassed the area surrounding the apartment complex. They spoke with neighbors, but no one had any useful information. Jennifer's apartment was thoroughly searched, and there were no signs of forced entry or disturbance. The apartment was clean, as if she had left of her own volition, but there were no clues as to where she had gone or what had happened. Jennifer's phone records were reviewed, but they revealed no new leads. There were no texts or calls made after she spoke with her father that morning, and no other communication to suggest she had any plans to meet anyone after work. Investigators found that her credit cards had not been used since the morning she disappeared, and her bank account had not shown any activity. This left a chilling void in the investigation, as it appeared that Jennifer had simply vanished without a trace. As the days passed, a few theories emerged, but none of them provided solid evidence of what had happened. One early theory suggested that Jennifer may have been a victim of a carjacking or kidnapping. This would explain the abandonment of her vehicle and the disappearance of her belongings. However, no witnesses had come forward to confirm such an event, and the lack of physical evidence from the scene made this theory difficult to prove. Another theory was that Jennifer had been the victim of a personal attack, possibly from someone she knew. But again, the absence of any obvious signs of struggle or forced entry into her apartment made it hard to support this line of thinking. As the investigation continued, the case grew colder. The police interviewed Jennifer's friends, family, and co-workers, but no one could offer any explanation for her disappearance. Theories swirled, but they were just that, ideas without any concrete evidence to back them up. Jennifer Kesse's disappearance remains one of the most perplexing cases in Orlando's history. Despite numerous efforts by law enforcement, volunteers, and the Kesse family to find her, there have been no breakthroughs. Over the years, her case has garnered national attention, and Jennifer's family has never stopped looking for answers. They've continued to push for renewed attention to the case, hoping that someone, somewhere, might know something that could lead to closure. The mystery of Jennifer Kesse's disappearance is a haunting reminder of how quickly lives can change, and how easily someone can vanish without a trace. Though years have passed, Jennifer's case has not been forgotten. Her family continues to fight for justice, and they remain hopeful that one day the truth will finally be revealed. As the rain continues to fall, Jennifer's story lingers in the minds of all who hear it, leaving an unresolved question in its wake. What happened to Jennifer Kesse on that fateful day, and why has no one been held accountable for her disappearance? The disappearance of Jennifer Kesse remained one of the most baffling and heartbreaking cases in Orlando, Florida. As days passed with no leads, the case seemed to stall. But in the midst of the growing uncertainty, a single piece of evidence, seemingly insignificant at first, would eventually become a focal point in the investigation: security camera footage. 2 days after Jennifer Kesse's disappearance, investigators began to comb through the security footage from the apartment complex where Jennifer lived. The footage came from the security cameras that monitored the common areas, including the parking lot where Jennifer's car had been found abandoned. It was, in essence, the only tangible clue they had, and investigators hoped it could provide the breakthrough they so desperately needed. The footage came from a security camera positioned near the entrance to Jennifer's condominium complex. It showed a man approaching Jennifer's car on the morning of her disappearance, around the same time Jennifer would have been at work. The man's face was obscured by the angle of the camera, but his actions were captured in clear detail. He appeared to be walking across the parking lot, casually approaching Jennifer's car. After a few moments, he unlocked the vehicle, entered, and briefly checked inside. He then closed the car door and walked away. At first glance, the footage seemed harmless, just a man walking in the parking lot, performing what could have been a mundane task. However, as investigators scrutinized the footage further, they noticed something unsettling. The man in the footage seemed to be acting in a deliberate manner, almost as if he were familiar with the area or knew exactly where Jennifer's car would be. He seemed confident, but there was an oddness to his behavior that could not be ignored. He didn't seem like an average passerby, someone who was just there to park a car or simply walking through the complex. Instead, there was something peculiar about his actions. He approached Jennifer's vehicle at a specific time, with no apparent urgency or distraction, suggesting a level of premeditation. The man's movements were measured, not hurried, which led investigators to consider that he might have been involved in Jennifer's disappearance. The man seen in the footage quickly became the center of attention in the investigation. Investigators began to review the video footage repeatedly, hoping to glean more information about the man's identity. They zoomed in on his clothing, his gait, and any other small details that might provide clues. The man appeared to be in his late 20s to early 30s, with dark hair and a medium build. His attire consisted of a dark-colored shirt and pants, along with a hat that obscured most of his face. It was difficult to make out many distinguishing features due to the camera angle and low resolution, but his actions were consistent enough to suggest something far more sinister than coincidence. The question remained, who was this man, and why was he at Jennifer's car? What did he know about her disappearance, and could he be involved in her vanishing? As investigators continued to examine the footage, they came to a critical conclusion: the man seen in the video did not appear to be someone Jennifer knew. There was no indication of any interaction between them or any communication, which ruled out the possibility of a simple encounter with a friend or acquaintance. The footage raised more questions than it answered, adding another layer of mystery to the case. The security footage, while revealing, still didn't provide enough information to identify the man with certainty. The footage was too grainy, the image resolution too poor, to make a positive identification. As a result, investigators began to explore other possibilities. They scoured the apartment complex's parking lot for any additional camera footage that might have captured the man from a different angle. They even enlisted the help of local businesses and nearby establishments that may have had security cameras that could have recorded the man's movements in the area. Despite these efforts, the man's identity remained a mystery. The lack of a clear image, coupled with the fact that no one in the apartment complex could recall seeing him before, made the search even more challenging. He didn't seem to be a resident of the complex, nor did he appear to be someone who was familiar with the area. In the meantime, the authorities released still images from the security footage to the public in the hopes that someone might recognize the man or know something that could help solve the case. The public's response was overwhelming, but unfortunately, it didn't lead to any breakthroughs. Hundreds of tips poured in, but none of them provided the crucial information that investigators were hoping for. As the weeks passed, the case garnered media attention, and the security footage became a key piece of the narrative. News outlets began airing the footage repeatedly, hoping that it might trigger someone's memory or inspire a new lead. Jennifer's family, desperate for answers, also became vocal advocates for finding out who the man in the footage was. Her parents, Drew and Joyce Kesse, appealed to the public for help, urging anyone who might know something to come forward. Despite the increased awareness surrounding the case, the investigation continued to hit dead ends. The footage had not led to any immediate breakthroughs, and as time wore on, investigators began to wonder whether the man captured in the footage had any connection to Jennifer's disappearance at all. Could it be that the footage was a red herring, a clue that led nowhere? As the investigation into the footage continued, speculation mounted. Some theorized that the man might have been a stranger who had targeted Jennifer at random. Others suggested that he could have been a stalker who had been watching her for days, or even weeks, before taking action. There was also the possibility that the man in the footage was someone with knowledge of the apartment complex or someone who had worked there. Other theories proposed that the man might have been involved in a carjacking or some kind of robbery gone wrong. This could explain why he seemed so focused on Jennifer's vehicle. Still, the lack of physical evidence, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, meant that none of these theories could be confirmed. The more the footage was examined, the more frustrating the case became. While the footage undoubtedly provided a glimpse into the moments before Jennifer's disappearance, it raised just as many questions as it answered. Jennifer Kesse's case remains unsolved, despite all the efforts to identify the man in the security footage. The footage, though pivotal, has not led to an arrest or the discovery of new evidence. While it remains an important part of the investigation, the lack of a clear answer has only fueled the sense of frustration and hopelessness for those closest to the case. To this day, Jennifer's family continues to push for answers, and they maintain their belief that the man in the footage holds the key to unlocking the mystery of her disappearance. The security footage, while providing some clues, has not been enough to close the case, and the search for justice continues. The man in the footage remains unidentified, but Jennifer Kesse's family and investigators have not given up hope. The mystery of her disappearance, and the man who may hold the answers, continues to haunt the case. The rain still falls, and the questions linger, as her family waits for the moment when the truth finally comes to light. The disappearance of Jennifer Kesse, a young woman from Orlando, Florida, has remained one of the most perplexing and heartbreaking cases in the state's history. Her story began with an ordinary morning on January 24, 2006, but by the end of that day, Jennifer had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a devastated family and an investigation that continues to this day. With little to go on and the clock ticking, law enforcement quickly mobilized, launching a massive investigation into her disappearance. Despite their best efforts, the investigation has been stymied by a lack of physical evidence, the absence of witnesses, and the growing frustration of Jennifer's family. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged, but no definitive answers have been found. This is the story of the investigation and the many theories that have surfaced. When Jennifer Kesse failed to show up for work on the morning of January 24, 2006, her co-workers quickly became concerned. They reached out to her family, and by that evening, her parents, Drew and Joyce Kesse, were frantically trying to locate their daughter. The initial search for Jennifer focused on her apartment complex, where her car was found abandoned in the parking lot. Jennifer's purse, cell phone, and other belongings were missing, leading investigators to believe she had been taken against her will. The car, however, was in pristine condition. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. The first breakthrough came when security footage from the parking lot showed a man approaching Jennifer's car around the time she was last seen. The man's actions were unusual. He unlocked the car, checked inside, and then walked away. This footage became a crucial part of the investigation, but it provided only limited information. The man's face was obscured, and his identity remained a mystery. The police expanded their search, hoping the footage would help identify the man and lead them to Jennifer. However, despite releasing the footage to the public, no one came forward with useful information. As the days turned into weeks, investigators began canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have had contact with Jennifer. They explored the possibility of foul play, but there were no clear suspects, and no one had seen anything unusual. Jennifer's family held out hope that she would be found, but as time passed without any leads, the case grew colder. With the investigation stalling, a number of theories began to emerge about what could have happened to Jennifer. Each theory seemed plausible, but none of them provided definitive answers. 1. Kidnapping or carjacking gone wrong. One of the earliest theories to surface was that Jennifer had been the victim of a carjacking or kidnapping. This theory was partly fueled by the discovery of her abandoned car, which was parked in a manner that suggested it had been intentionally left behind. Some speculated that Jennifer had been forced into the car by the mysterious man seen in the footage and was driven away. Perhaps, the theory went, the abductor intended to take her somewhere, but something went wrong, and Jennifer was left behind, or the abductor was scared off. However, there was no physical evidence to support this theory. Investigators found no signs of a struggle, and Jennifer's car was left in near-perfect condition. Additionally, there was no indication that her credit cards or bank accounts had been used, which further called into question the likelihood of a ransom or abduction for financial gain. The carjacking theory, while plausible at first, eventually lost traction as more evidence was gathered. 2. A stalker or obsessed individual. Another theory that gained attention was that Jennifer had been targeted by someone she knew or by an obsessive stalker. Some of Jennifer's friends later revealed that she had been receiving unwanted attention from a few men, though none of them seemed dangerous at the time. The theory suggested that someone may have been following Jennifer or had become obsessed with her, leading them to take drastic action. However, there was no clear evidence to support this theory. Jennifer's family and friends described her as cautious and vigilant, especially when it came to personal safety. No one could recall any specific incidents or troubling interactions that would have suggested Jennifer was being stalked. Moreover, the lack of evidence pointing to any known suspects made this theory less likely. 3. A random stranger attack. As the investigation continued, some began to believe that Jennifer's disappearance might have been the result of a random attack. This theory proposed that Jennifer was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, a victim of a crime of opportunity. The idea was that someone in the apartment complex, or passing through, had spotted Jennifer and seized the chance to abduct her. While this theory is certainly plausible, it left many unanswered questions. For one, it was unclear why Jennifer would have been targeted in the first place. She had no known enemies, and there were no signs of personal conflict in her life that would have made her an obvious target. Additionally, the lack of a struggle and the fact that Jennifer's car was left in such an undisturbed condition made this theory harder to support. 4. Involvement of someone Jennifer knew. Another possible theory was that Jennifer's disappearance was somehow connected to someone she knew, a friend, a co-worker, or a romantic interest. Some speculated that Jennifer's boyfriend, Robert, who lived in Miami, could have been involved, though he was quickly ruled out after law enforcement interviewed him extensively and confirmed his alibi. This theory also considered the possibility that Jennifer might have been involved in an argument or dispute with someone she knew, which escalated to violence. However, after speaking with Jennifer's family, friends, and colleagues, investigators found no evidence to support the idea of a violent confrontation. 5. Abduction by an unknown suspect with local knowledge. Given the specific nature of the car's location and the timing of the events, another theory suggested that the abductor might have had some knowledge of the area. The fact that the man in the footage appeared to be familiar with the parking lot and Jennifer's vehicle suggested that he might have had prior knowledge of Jennifer's routine. This raised the possibility that the abductor was someone who had been watching her, perhaps for days or even weeks, waiting for the right moment to act. While this theory seemed plausible, it did not lead to any solid evidence. Investigators tried to trace the man seen in the footage, but no one was able to identify him. As time passed without any breakthroughs, this theory lost momentum. As months turned into years, the case became a cold case. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, private investigators, and the Kesse family, no new leads emerged. Over the years, several investigators and experts have weighed in on the case, offering their own theories, but none have been able to definitively solve the mystery of Jennifer Kesse's disappearance. Jennifer's family, particularly her parents Drew and Joyce, have remained tireless in their search for answers. They have continually pressed law enforcement to reopen the case and dedicate more resources to finding their daughter. They have also pushed for the release of new evidence, such as the security footage, hoping that the public might hold the key to solving the case. Despite the many theories that have surfaced over the years, the disappearance of Jennifer Kesse remains an unsolved mystery. The investigation continues, and the Kesse family's hope for closure remains as strong as ever, even as the years go by without answers. The case of Jennifer Kesse, who disappeared in 2006 under mysterious circumstances, remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in the United States. While law enforcement, Jennifer's family, and the public have tirelessly worked to uncover the truth, the case has become colder with each passing year. New developments and theories have emerged over the years, but none have provided a definitive answer to what happened to Jennifer Kesse on that fateful January day. Despite the many twists and turns, Jennifer's disappearance continues to garner attention, with the investigation remaining open, the theories still swirling, and the hope of justice still burning for her family. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged about what could have happened to Jennifer. While the theories vary in their scope and plausibility, they all share one common theme: the lack of conclusive evidence. Despite many leads, no one has been able to definitively explain what happened to Jennifer on January 24, 2006. Below are the most prominent theories that have emerged. 1. Abduction by a stranger. One of the leading theories surrounding Jennifer's disappearance is that she was abducted by a stranger. According to this theory, Jennifer was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and someone took advantage of an opportunity to kidnap her. Supporters of this theory often cite the fact that Jennifer's car was found unlocked and abandoned in the parking lot, suggesting that the abductor may have been familiar with the area and knew how to evade detection. This theory was fueled by the security footage showing an unidentified man walking toward Jennifer's car, but no conclusive evidence has surfaced linking him to the crime. Investigators were unable to identify the man, despite releasing the footage to the public. Additionally, the lack of evidence of a struggle and the fact that Jennifer's car was parked without visible signs of foul play cast doubt on the stranger abduction theory. If a stranger had abducted her, why was there no sign of violence? Nevertheless, the idea of an opportunistic stranger kidnapping Jennifer is still a possibility. The fact that no one had reported seeing the man before, and the lack of a clear motive, makes this theory both chilling and plausible. 2. A targeted attack by someone she knew. Another theory suggests that Jennifer may have been abducted or attacked by someone she knew. Supporters of this theory point to the fact that Jennifer had a relatively small social circle and was known to have had a few interactions with men who could potentially have developed an unhealthy obsession with her. Though Jennifer's family and friends have consistently stated that she had no known enemies, investigators have considered the possibility that a person she knew, perhaps a co-worker, acquaintance, or someone she had met socially, may have been involved. Several key pieces of evidence seem to support this theory. For example, Jennifer's friends and family reported that she had been receiving unwanted attention from men in the months before her disappearance. Could one of these men have escalated things to a dangerous level? Another factor that suggests a personal connection is the fact that Jennifer's purse, cell phone, and other personal items were missing, but her car was left in good condition, which is not typical in a carjacking scenario. However, there's little evidence to suggest that anyone close to Jennifer was capable of such an act. Her boyfriend at the time, Robert, was quickly ruled out as a suspect, as he had an airtight alibi. Furthermore, Jennifer's family reported no signs of unusual behavior or threats, making this theory a bit more speculative than others. 3. A stalker or obsessive fan. Following Jennifer's disappearance, some investigators and family members began to consider the possibility that Jennifer may have been stalked or harassed by an obsessive fan or admirer. It's not uncommon for individuals to develop unhealthy fixations on people they barely know, and some theorize that Jennifer might have been the target of such a person. A stalker could have been monitoring her daily routines, looking for an opportunity to act. Support for this theory comes from Jennifer's interactions with a few men, which her friends later described as uncomfortable or excessive. There were reports of one man in particular who had been seen lurking around her apartment complex, which led to suspicions that he could have been stalking her. But, once again, there was no hard evidence to link any of these individuals to her disappearance. The idea of a stalker is unsettling because it suggests that Jennifer may have been being watched for some time before she vanished. The secrecy and premeditated nature of the abduction, combined with the lack of signs of a struggle, fit with the idea of someone who had been planning this for days or even weeks. However, without concrete evidence, this theory remains highly speculative. 4. A crime of opportunity or random violence. Another theory that has gained traction over the years is that Jennifer's disappearance was a crime of opportunity or random violence. This theory suggests that Jennifer may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and her abductor saw an opportunity to strike when she was alone. This could explain why there were no signs of forced entry at her apartment and why her car was found abandoned. The lack of evidence indicating a personal motive further supports this idea. Perhaps her abductor simply acted on impulse. The idea of a random crime is terrifying because it underscores the vulnerability of seemingly safe places. Jennifer's apartment complex was considered secure, and she was known for being cautious about her safety. A random attacker could have seen her as an easy target, leading to her abduction. However, This theory doesn't explain why the man in the security footage seemed to approach the car with such familiarity, nor does it account for the absence of any forensic evidence that would link the crime to a random act of violence. 5. Human trafficking or organized crime. Given the uncertainty surrounding Jennifer's disappearance, some investigators have suggested that her case might be connected to human trafficking or organized crime. While there's no direct evidence to support this theory, it is not entirely implausible. Some speculated that Jennifer's youth and appearance may have made her a target for traffickers, particularly since her disappearance occurred without any clear motive or trace. This theory was especially troubling because it hinted at a broader issue. Jennifer may not have been the only victim, and her abduction could have been part of a larger, more sinister network. However, there's little concrete evidence linking Jennifer's case to human trafficking. The absence of further disappearances or patterns made it difficult for investigators to pursue this theory with any conviction. Despite the lack of breakthroughs, there have been new developments in Jennifer's case in recent years. In 2021, after years of public pressure, the Orlando Police Department announced that they had a new lead in the case. They confirmed that they were re-examining the case using new forensic technology, including DNA evidence and improved investigative methods. They also released new information, such as the fact that Jennifer's car had been parked in a specific location in the parking lot before her disappearance, suggesting it was not just left randomly. Furthermore, Jennifer's family, particularly her parents Drew and Joyce Kesse, have continued to press for more action on the case. They have worked closely with law enforcement and even set up a reward fund in an effort to encourage new tips. They remain hopeful that one day, someone will come forward with the information that will bring closure to their family. The case of Jennifer Kesse is far from over, and her family continues to fight for justice. The theories surrounding her disappearance offer potential explanations, but none of them can be proven with the evidence at hand. The case remains a painful reminder of how quickly someone can vanish, and how difficult it is to uncover the truth when the evidence is elusive. As time goes on, the mystery of Jennifer Kesse's disappearance remains unsolved, but the hope for answers remains strong. The Kesse family continues to hold on to the belief that one day, they will find out what happened to their beloved daughter. The disappearance of Jennifer Kesse in January 2006 shattered the lives of her family, leaving them in a constant state of heartache and uncertainty. For Jennifer's parents, Drew and Joyce Kesse, the absence of their daughter has been a never-ending nightmare, but it has also ignited an unwavering resolve to seek justice and uncover the truth. Over the years, they have fought tirelessly to bring attention to the case, never giving up on the hope that one day, the mystery of their daughter's disappearance will be solved. Jennifer's case quickly gained national attention, but the lack of concrete evidence and the slow pace of the investigation left her family feeling helpless. With each passing year and no new developments, the Kesses grew frustrated, but their determination only grew stronger. They refused to let their daughter be forgotten, and through their relentless efforts, they turned Jennifer's case into a crusade for justice. In the initial days following Jennifer's disappearance, Drew and Joyce Kesse, along with other family members and friends, joined the search for their daughter. They worked alongside law enforcement, distributing flyers, organizing searches, and speaking to the media to keep the case in the public eye. They hoped that someone, somewhere, might have seen something or had information that could help solve the mystery. Jennifer's parents were determined to keep their daughter's name in the spotlight. They knew that without the public's awareness and involvement, the chances of finding Jennifer or bringing her abductor to justice would be slim. Despite the overwhelming emotional toll, they remained focused on one goal: to find answers. During this time, Drew and Joyce quickly became the vocal advocates for their daughter's case. They pushed for increased media coverage, and in a show of solidarity, they appeared on television programs, radio shows, and news outlets to raise awareness. Their voices were clear and filled with pain, but they never wavered in their commitment to finding Jennifer. The Kesses also worked closely with law enforcement, staying in constant contact with detectives and investigators. They asked questions, raised concerns, and pushed for new leads to be explored. But the case remained stalled. The lack of any solid evidence, the absence of witnesses, and the unclear circumstances surrounding Jennifer's disappearance made it difficult for authorities to make significant progress. As the weeks turned into months, then into years, the frustration and helplessness felt by Jennifer's family deepened. The lack of closure weighed heavily on them, and as time passed, they struggled with the emotional toll of not knowing what happened to their daughter. Drew and Joyce's relationship with law enforcement became strained at times as they pushed for more action, but the lack of new leads left them feeling as though they were banging their heads against a wall. In 2008, after several years of working alongside law enforcement, the Kesses decided to take matters into their own hands. They hired a private investigator to look into the case from a fresh perspective. The hope was that someone not connected to the investigation would be able to identify overlooked clues or connect the dots in ways the police had not. This decision marked a turning point in the Kesses' fight for justice. They realized that while they couldn't control the investigation, they could control the narrative surrounding Jennifer's disappearance. They began using their own resources to explore new angles and raise new questions. While this approach didn't immediately solve the case, it gave the family some sense of empowerment amid the despair. One of the Kesses' main concerns was the lack of resources dedicated to the case. Over time, as Jennifer's case went cold, the family was forced to watch as the case faded from the headlines. They knew that without public attention and continued pressure on law enforcement, Jennifer's disappearance would risk being forgotten. Drew and Joyce began lobbying for more resources to be devoted to the case. They met with local lawmakers, attended city council meetings, and pushed for law enforcement to prioritize the investigation. Through these efforts, they managed to secure additional funding and resources to keep the case alive. The Kesses also campaigned for the release of new evidence to the public. They were frustrated by the slow pace of the investigation and the lack of transparency from authorities. While they understood the need for discretion in an active case, they felt that greater public involvement could lead to new tips and breakthroughs. They pressed for the release of security footage, photographs, and any other information that might prompt the public to remember something crucial. Over time, their efforts paid off. The Orlando Police Department began to take more steps to keep the case in the public eye, and Jennifer's case was featured in various true crime documentaries, podcasts, and news stories. This media attention provided the family with an opportunity to keep Jennifer's memory alive and remind the public that she was still missing and that justice was still needed. As the years passed, Drew and Joyce became advocates for the use of new investigative techniques in Jennifer's case. They pushed for the adoption of cutting-edge forensic technologies, such as DNA analysis and advanced facial recognition software, in an effort to uncover new leads. In 2021, after nearly 15 years without significant progress, Jennifer's case was reopened. The Orlando Police Department confirmed that they were using new forensic technology to review evidence, and they began re-examining the case with a fresh set of eyes. The Kesses, relieved that the investigation was being given renewed attention, continued to press for more aggressive action. They insisted that Jennifer's case be treated as a priority, given the disturbing nature of her disappearance. This renewed push for justice sparked new hope within the family. Though the case remained unsolved, the use of new technology provided the Kesses with the sense that the investigation was not over, that someone, somewhere, might finally be able to provide the key to solving the mystery of Jennifer Kesse's disappearance. Despite their tireless efforts, the emotional toll on Drew and Joyce Kesse has been immense. The pain of not knowing what happened to their daughter is something they continue to carry every day. In interviews, both parents have described the overwhelming grief of living with the uncertainty of Jennifer's fate, and how the passage of time only deepens the ache of not having answers. However, their unwavering love for their daughter and their fierce determination to see justice done have kept them going. They continue to advocate for Jennifer, attend rallies, and participate in events to raise awareness about her case. The Kesses refuse to let their daughter's story fade into obscurity. They have become a voice for other families of missing persons, urging law enforcement to take more proactive steps and pushing for greater support for victims' families. Jennifer's disappearance has not just been a story of loss, it has become a symbol of the power of family resilience. Drew and Joyce Kesse have turned their grief into action, using their platform to raise awareness, push for justice, and advocate for other families in similar situations. They have become champions for the missing, and their fight for justice is an example of the strength and resolve of parents who refuse to give up on their children. As the years go by, the search for Jennifer Kesse continues. Her family remains dedicated to finding the truth, and while the road to justice has been long and difficult, they have not given up. Jennifer's story is far from over, and as long as the Kesses have breath in their bodies, they will keep fighting for the justice their daughter deserves. Their commitment to finding answers is a testament to the unbreakable bond of family and the unyielding desire for justice, no matter how much time passes. As the years passed without a resolution in Jennifer Kesse's case, the public's interest began to wane. Yet, the relentless efforts of her family, particularly her parents, Drew and Joyce Kesse, to keep the case alive led to an unexpected twist. Jennifer's disappearance became a viral story, capturing the attention of a new generation of people who had never heard of her case. This renewed focus on Jennifer's story not only reignited the investigation but also created a powerful movement to demand justice. The Kesses, who had long advocated for the public to stay engaged with Jennifer's case, had watched as the media attention slowly dwindled. But in 2018, the case took a dramatic turn when Jennifer's story was picked up by a popular true crime podcast. The podcast was widely listened to by millions of people, and with a fresh perspective on the mystery, it breathed new life into the case. This marked the beginning of Jennifer's case going viral. In 2018, the popular podcast The Disappearance of Jennifer Kesse began to make waves across the true crime community. The show took a deep dive into the details of Jennifer's life, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, and the subsequent investigation. By recounting Jennifer's story in a compelling and emotional way, the podcast caught the attention of thousands of listeners, many of whom had never heard of her before. The podcast's success was undeniable. It not only revived interest in the case but also spurred online communities and social media platforms to rally behind the Kesse family. As listeners from across the globe began to share the story on various online forums, social media pages, and podcasts, the case quickly gained traction. The story, once a local tragedy, was now an international mystery, and people from all over were discussing and sharing their theories. What made this podcast stand out was its ability to humanize Jennifer, making her more than just another missing person's case. Listeners were drawn to the personal side of Jennifer's life, her bright future, her close-knit family, and her inexplicable disappearance. By showcasing the emotional toll it took on her family and friends, the podcast gave the case a human face, making it relatable to millions of listeners. The podcast also included interviews with private investigators, law enforcement officials, and experts in missing persons cases, shedding light on the complexities of Jennifer's case. As a result, listeners began to feel invested in the investigation and wanted to see justice for Jennifer. The rise of true crime podcasts marked a turning point, but social media played a pivotal role in spreading Jennifer's story even further. Facebook groups, Twitter threads, and Reddit discussions began to flourish, as people from around the world joined the search for answers. Hashtags like #FindJenniferKesse and #JusticeForJennifer became rallying cries, with supporters posting about the case daily and encouraging others to share information. On Instagram, Jennifer's family began posting updates, encouraging followers to share and spread the word about the case. The Kesses were able to reach new audiences through the power of visual content, sharing family photos, personal reflections, and updates on the status of the investigation. This social media presence also helped maintain public interest in the case, providing a continuous reminder that Jennifer's story was far from over. The Kesses' social media campaign was both strategic and personal. They didn't just want to draw attention to their daughter's case. They wanted to keep the pressure on law enforcement to continue pursuing leads. As more and more people became aware of Jennifer's disappearance, the Kesses made it clear that they wouldn't stop fighting for justice, regardless of how much time had passed. Moreover, the viral response allowed Jennifer's case to gain exposure on major news outlets. The story of the missing young woman from Orlando, Florida, who had slipped through the cracks of the criminal justice system, was now being covered on news websites, talk shows, and television news reports. The rise of online forums and social media groups dedicated to missing persons cases helped create a network of armchair detectives who were committed to solving the mystery. These online communities became a force of their own. Thousands of people from across the world began analyzing the case, sharing theories, and combing through the available evidence. Some users contributed by reviewing old police reports, re-examining the security footage, and brainstorming new ideas for how the case could be solved. One of the most significant contributions came from a group of online users who took a deeper look at the security footage of the man seen walking toward Jennifer's car. Through their analysis, they pointed out details that had previously gone unnoticed, subtle clues in the man's body language and movements. While this didn't result in any immediate breakthroughs, it demonstrated how collective efforts in online communities could keep the case moving forward. The Kesses themselves began to engage with these online communities. Drew and Joyce actively communicated with the public through social media platforms, thanking those who were working to keep Jennifer's story alive. They also shared updates on any new developments, encouraging others to continue helping in any way they could. This online support system became a crucial part of the fight for justice. The Kesses knew that the power of public interest and public pressure could push law enforcement to take more action. As Jennifer's case continued to spread across social media and podcasts, the case was revisited by news organizations who were now more inclined to cover it due to its viral nature. Television shows like Dateline and 48 Hours covered the case, bringing further attention to Jennifer's disappearance and her family's ongoing fight for justice. The media coverage helped ensure that Jennifer's case was never forgotten. With new eyes on the investigation, public interest reached a fever pitch, and Jennifer's case remained in the spotlight. The Kesses were featured in interviews, telling their story and urging anyone with information to come forward. Their message resonated with the public and inspired many to help in whatever way they could. In 2021, as a result of this renewed attention, the Orlando Police Department confirmed they were re-examining Jennifer's case with new forensic techniques, including DNA testing and enhanced security footage analysis. While no definitive breakthroughs were made immediately, the Kesses' public advocacy had helped bring Jennifer's case to a point where it was once again active. Despite the passage of time, the viral attention surrounding Jennifer's case gave her family renewed hope. It also made it clear that the public's involvement in a case, through social media and online platforms, could have a profound impact on how investigations are handled. The Kesses' tireless efforts to keep Jennifer's case in the public eye, combined with the power of social media and true crime podcasts, created a momentum that would not easily be stopped. Jennifer's story has transcended her disappearance. It has become a symbol of the fight for justice, not just for Jennifer, but for countless other families who have experienced the pain of losing a loved one with no answers. The family's ability to turn their heartbreak into a viral movement is a testament to their love for their daughter and their unwavering determination to see justice done. As the search for answers continues, the Kesses remain hopeful that one day, the truth will finally come to light. And with the public's continued support, there is hope that Jennifer Kesse's story will not be one of forgotten loss, but one of justice, closure, and the power of a family's love. As we close today's journey into the mystery of Jennifer Kesse's disappearance, we are reminded that the search for justice is far from over. The Kesse family's fight for answers, driven by love and an unwavering commitment to their daughter, continues with each passing day. And while we may not yet know the truth of what happened to Jennifer, her story, with the help of the public, remains alive and full of possibility. If you've been moved by Jennifer's story, or if you have any information, no matter how small, that could help bring justice to her family, we urge you to come forward. Every piece of the puzzle counts, and your voice could be the one to make a difference. Share this video, raise awareness, and keep the conversation going. Let's help the Kesse family find the closure they deserve. And if you haven't already, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Join the fight for justice, as we continue to seek answers and bring those responsible to light. Jennifer's case may have gone viral, but it's the continued dedication of people like you that can turn hope into truth. Keep the story alive, and together, let's demand justice.